and welcome to the final MMA Lotcast episode for 2025. This episode we're covering PFL Europe 4, which is headlined by two title fights. In the co-main event, we got Chris Cyborg returning and looking to, I believe, either defend or maybe even win the vacant. Maybe she's the featherweight champion. I'm not even entirely sure what's going on with that division, but I know she's going up against Sarah Collins, who's an undefeated 6-0 fighter. And in the main event, we got the recently resigned Vadim Nemkov taking on former PFL champion Renan Ferreira in the main event for the vacant World Heavyweight Championship. We got a couple PFL Europe finals on this card as well, I believe, for the bantamweight and lightweight divisions. And then we got some other fun fights as well with some interesting PFL prospects. Again, this is the final MMA Lotcast episode of the year, and again, quality is horrible. At least this time I've moved back into my office now. Got the blank canvas behind me, a few things on the ground, my TV up as well. But this will be the shittiest quality video that you guys will see for the foreseeable future, as when I get back next year, I'll have a completely new setup and a bunch of things updated on the channel as well. So stay tuned for later in the year. I'll be doing a little bit of a recap video talking about just the how I did on the year and then what you guys can expect for 2026. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to getting into all that good stuff, and then obviously breaking down this PFL card for you guys. Just a quick reminder, there's also 3 more shows, regional shows, to finish off the year. I'll be doing main event breakdowns for all of those cards, but the full card write-ups and track plays for those events can be found on the MMALOTN Patreon page, which is also where you'll be able to find the track plays that I have for this weekend's cards, not just this PFL card, but the UFC Vegas card as well. All right. Without further ado, let's get right into the breakdowns here for this 10-fight PFL Europe card. It kicks off between Ryan Balbali, who comes in at plus 300, going up against Levi Batchelor, who comes in at minus 400. Now, Balbali makes his PFL debut after going 5-3 as an amateur and having a successful pro debut earlier this year. He looks to be a mediocre kickboxer at best. He seems to be somewhat active off his back when he does get taken down, but it's obvious that's where he is weakest when he is taken down and smothered by his opponents. I think the large majority of his losses on the regional scene, on the amateur scene, came with him getting out grappled, and I expect that to happen once again as he takes on Welshman Levi Batchelor. Now, Batchelor had a pretty dominant debut in his PFL game last time around, as he was able to outgrind his opponent and then eventually pull off an Ezekiel choke in the dying seconds of that fight to improve his record. He went 10-0 as an amateur, with his only loss coming in against Ewan McKenzie, who is a high-level prospect on the regional scene right now. But I think Batchelor could definitely fill those shoes too, especially with the way the PFL seems to be matching him up. There's a reason he's a minus 400 favorite here, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to eventually set up a submission and force the tap here from Balbali within 2 rounds. Next up, we got probably my favorite fight on the card. Now, this is a die-hard MMA fight, right? If you know, you know. We got Paulina Wisniewska coming in at plus 165, going up against Sabrina de Sousa, who comes in at minus 190. Now, Wisniewska is a fighter that was doing very well through her last PFL Europe stint, where she is 4-0 with the promotion, won the PFL Europe title last year, and 3 of her 4 wins with the PFL have come inside the distance. She went 18-7 as an amateur, but as a pro, she's been looking pretty damn good. She's long and lanky, and she utilizes that range very well with straight shots down the pipe and good footwork. And then with her BJJ, she's very active in terms of staying ahead in the scrambles, getting the back of her opponents, sinking in chokes, or at least maintaining that dominant position so she can rain down big shots on her opponents. Unfortunately for her, she's fighting one of the hottest amateur prospects, or at least one of the hottest prospects to come out from the amateur scene since Mohamed Makhachev. De Sousa went, I think 15-0 or 14-0 as an amateur. Finished the majority of her opponents. She's now 3-0 as a pro. She's 4-0 as a pro. 3 of those wins have come inside the distance. She nearly finished her PFL debut as well, but she went up against a very tough Sarah Orozca, who was 8-7 at the time. Very difficult to finish. De Sousa nearly finished her in the first round with a nasty body shot, but Orozco managed to stay in the fight, and then De Sousa just started to rely on her grappling, and she was able to grind Orozco out for the rest of that fight. De Sousa looks like a nasty striker, but the majority of her wins have come by submission, showcasing that she's a very well-rounded threat. Now, she's going up against Wisniewska, who, again, dangerous as well with her lanky range and her striking style, and then obviously her very active BJJ game. But I think that De Sousa is just a little bit more lethal as a striker and can be a little bit more lethal when this fight eventually hits the grappling realm. I expect it to be somewhat competitive, but for the most part, I expect De Sousa to be the one in the driver's seat, and that should allow her to outpoint, outwork, and outgrind Wisniewska, and that allows De Sousa to win this fight by decision. Our next up, we got Gustavo Oliveira coming in at plus 250, going up against Movsar Ibragimov, who comes in at minus 300. Now, Oliveira caught the eyes of the MMA world last time around with a viral spinning back elbow knockout to finish his opponent in the first round. Going into that fight, Oliveira was the underdog to a guy that was a little bit sharper of a striker, and we saw that play out a little bit before Gustavo was able to line up that spinning back elbow and get the knockout. This guy used to fight for KSW as well, and he's been grinded out in a few of his fights, which makes sense considering he comes from a Muay Thai background. But he struggled off of his back. He struggled in the grappling realm. There was even a fight that he ended up winning late, but he was getting grinded out for the first 2.5 rounds before he eventually landed a big shot. And that's kind of the gist of his game. If he can't get to his striking, and if he's facing a strong grappler, he's probably going to come up on the losing end. Unfortunately for him, that's exactly what he's facing this weekend against the 7-0 Movsar Ibragimov, who had a successful PFL debut back in July where he was able to submit a veteran in Gerardo Fanny, who is a nasty kickboxer as well. We saw Ibragimov apply the Von Flue choke and get the tap, and he's a guy that has some solid power in his hands as well, but it's really all about his grappling game, taking opponents to the ground and looking to submit them or finish them from that top position. He has a great gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to as well, but he is a guy that wants to get this done sooner than later. He also had a 21-4 run as an amateur, so he has plenty of experience coming into the pro ranks, and it's showing off with the level of opponents he's been going up against and still having very good performances. I think Oliveira obviously has a shot to land that big shot to put Ibragimov out, but there is a reason Ibragimov is, he is minus 300 is because of that grappling advantage he should hold. So I expect him to set up his takedowns well. I expect him to slowly grind Oliveira out. I think it's going to be tough to put Oliveira away, so I'm going to go with Ibragimov and Ibragimov by decision. Our next up, we got I believe this is the lightweight final now between Connor Hughes coming in at minus 155, going up against Alexander Chizov, who comes in at plus 135. Now, Hughes came up short in the PFL Europe finale last year against Jakub Kashuba, and that was a fight where he nearly finished Kashuba early, but emptied his gas tank and ended up getting finished himself in the 4th round of that fight. Since then, he's now 2-0, finishing both of his opponents this year. The first in the 2nd round and the last against Gino Van Steenis, where he landed a perfect head kick in the 1st round of that fight to put him away. Hughes used to be a guy that utilized a grappling approach, looking to take opponents to the ground and get that rear naked choke as soon as possible. Then he started to transition to a guy that's more of a striker with his methodical approach and utilizing power punches. There have been a few fights where he's kind of mismanaged his gas tank, and even in fights he ended up winning, his body language just doesn't look that great in deep water. So I think that's why he's focusing more on kind of just picking his spots and looking to knock his opponents out and utilizing the threat of his power to walk his opponents down and eventually land those big shots. Now he's going up against Alexander Chizov, who a lot of people seem to be writing off going into his Mark Ewan fight where he was a big underdog, and we were able to cash on him that night because we knew he was much better than the odds indicated, and he only needed like a minute or so to finish Mark Ewan. doing. Or sorry, about 90 seconds. The two losses that he does have came against Daniel Gittins, where he showed a little bit of a lapse in fight IQ by mixing it up on the ground with Gittins, where that was probably the only way Gittins was going to win the fight. And then prior to that, he ended up losing to Akoiden Duke, who is a very underrated regional fighter who's had some big wins of his own. But Chizov at his best is a very slick and methodical striker with good counter striking, good straight shots down the pipe, and does a great job in terms of just dictating the pace and managing the range against his opponents. And whenever they try to crash the distance with big power, he's able to snipe them down the pipe and land quicker with those straight shots. He's going to have to lean on that here against Hughes, who's going to be looking to stalk him and try to land his big power, but I think Chizov is the better striker. I think for Hughes to have success, he's either going to have to find that early knockout or lean on the grappling that we saw from earlier on in his career, because that's where Chizov might be able to kind of show some flaws. I think Chizov has improved his grappling defense, don't get me wrong, but if Hughes can implement that strength advantage and that grappling, he might be able to get the better of Chizov on the ground. But I think if he takes that approach, his gas tank is going to suffer, and that will only allow Chizov to start running away with this in deeper water. And with this being 5 rounds, that is definitely something you need to keep in mind. But I'm going to lean on Chizov here. I think his better technical striking, his crisp counters, and his durability should help him stay away from too much trouble from Hughes, who's just a little bit too aggressive and reckless at times, and I think that's going to cause him some issues against Chizov. So I expect Chizov to finish in between rounds 3 and 4, and I like him as the underdog as well. All right, next up, we got Boris Embarga and Atangana coming in at minus 600, going up against Guilherme Soares, who comes in at plus 425. Now, Atangana came into the PFL as a highly touted prospect, finishing all of his opponents pretty much. And then in September, he took on a short notice fight for the PFL after the Lazy King was forced out of his main event. So they needed a little bit of a boost to the ticket sales, so they brought in Atangana. This guy's a firecracker of power, athleticism, explosivity, and he has shown he can go into the third round if needed and still be effective there. He throws with big power, can mix in the grappling if he sees enough of an advantage over his opponents there, and he seems like a guy similar to Patrick Habirora, who I'm going to be talking about later, who has a ton of potential and could potentially be a very big PFL star. Now, he's going up against Guilherme Soares, who just competed for LFA back in September and picked up a decision victory over Robin Roos. That's a fourth straight victory for Soares ever since returning from a 7-year hiatus. And he's a guy that's originally from Brazil, has set up shop in Portugal, and I think that's why he's been taking a lot of these European challenges as of late. To me, he's like a very poor man's version of Danilo Marquez. He's big, he's kind of strong, he's a BJJ black belt, but he doesn't really do anything all that well. I think this is a perfect fight for Atangana to continue his early finishing ways by dictating the pace early, shucking off the takedowns from Soares, as I'm sure Soares wants nothing to do with his striking game. And then as soon as Atangana sees the opening, I expect him to explode into it and eventually get that early finish here. Normally we see Atangana up at like minus 1,000, minus 1,500, but I think looking at this on paper and seeing the 17-7 record from Soares, a lot of people are like giving the Brazilian a little bit more credit than he deserves, but I think Atangana is going to wipe him pretty quickly, and I think he'll get it done under 1.5 rounds. All right, that brings us to our second PFL Europe finale now, which goes down in the bantamweight division, where we got Beris Adiguzel coming in at minus 180, going up against Dean Garnett, who comes in at plus 155. Now, Adiguzel is a very nasty finisher who is 6-0 after dropping his only pro loss back in Cage Warriors back in May of 2023, where he got grinded out and eventually finished in the third round of that matchup. But he's clearly a kickboxer with nasty power, and he's been snatching the bodies of his opponents, crumpling opponent after opponent with body shots. Like I said, he's 6-0 since that loss. Done a great job of implementing his kickboxing background and working the body of his opponents. And he finished 3 straight opponents with body shots in that stretch. When he's in his groove, he's very dangerous in terms of putting your lights out in seconds. 8 of his 9 wins have come in round 1, with 7 of those 8 wins coming in less than 2 minutes. If he can keep fights in the striking realm, he's going to be a very dangerous fighter. But there are clear holes in his grappling game that not many fighters have been able to take advantage of, mainly because they weren't as good enough to get away from that striking game and get to the grappling until this weekend. I think Dean Garnett, even though he's getting up there in age at 37 years old, showcased in his last fight against Jan Chaplowski that he can still hang with some young guns and still get off on some success. I think Garnett, his BJJ black belt, we often see him utilizing it defensively, but in recent fights we've been seeing him use it offensively by trying to stay away from the striking of his opponents, taking them to the ground, and eventually looking for openings to either submit them, grind them out, or smash them from that top position. He might be a little bit slow on plotting at times, but he does a great job in terms of finding the openings to take opponents to the ground, and then from there he does a good job in terms of keeping them on their backs. This is a fight where either Adiguzel starches Garnett early and looks that minus 180, or Garnett finds those openings and finds those counters to change levels, get Adiguzel to the ground, and then just keep him there and wear him down until he eventually opens up a submission opportunity. I learned last time around by getting burnt by Garnett as a big underdog. I'm not making that mistake twice, as I feel like this is a matchup that if his durability holds up, he should be able to grind Adiguzel out and find a late submission. So give me the underdog to pull off the upset and get the dub here. All right, next up, we got Taylor Lapilus coming in at minus 325 going up against Liam Gittins, who comes in at plus 275. Now, Lapilus, a guy that I still don't completely understand why the UFC has let go twice now. You know, the first time he was with the promotion, he went 3-1. Then he got released. Then he went on a crazy winning streak. Then he got signed to the promotion again. Then he went 3-1 again, ending his run with the UFC on a 2-fight winning streak. He's had some solid victories and is a very tough puzzle to crack, but I think the UFC wasn't impressed with his lack of entertaining fights, and I think that's why they ended up letting him go. But this guy is one of the best fighters outside of the UFC. His athleticism, his striking, his range management, his timing, it's all very hard for a lot of fighters to get a hold of. You know, unless you're a very good wrestler, it's going to be hard to contain this guy. You know, we saw Farid Basharat able to grind out Lapilus, but more often than not, we see Lapilus stifling most grappling approaches and then picking opponents apart on the feet. He's very difficult to deal with once he starts to get into his groove, and he's still only 33 years old. Now, he's going up against Liam Gittins, who was the former Cage Warriors champion and recently got signed to the PFL after it seemed like his hopes of making it to the UFC had really fallen short. You know, if you are the Cage Warriors champion, more often than not, the UFC has an eye on you and wants to bring you into the fold. But for some reason, it seems like they didn't want to do that for Gittins, or at least PFL threw enough of a bag at Gittins for him to be like, you know what? Screw the UFC for now. Let me try to make a name for myself in the PFL. He's a guy that I've constantly underrated, but he's constantly gone out there and just pulled off upsets and won the title and even defended it once. Was about to defend it again before an unfortunate, I believe it was an eye poke that caused an end and a no contest to his last fight. And he was supposed to rematch Alessandro Giordano again, but there was a scuffle at the weigh-ins from one of Giordano's coaches, and then, you know, after Cage Warriors banned Giordano's coach, Giordano's like, fuck it, I'm not fighting. So that fight ended up getting canceled on weigh-in day, or even a fight day. I think they even pushed it to. But Gittins is a guy that likes to utilize pressure, likes to utilize a lot of output on the feet. Not the technically best fighter, but does enough and makes up for it with that forward pressure and try to break opponents down there. Tries to mix into the grappling, get to the wrestling game. But I think the lack of athleticism in his game will really cost him trouble as he faces tougher levels of competition. And that's exactly what he's facing here in a guy with Taylor Lapilus, who should have good enough defensive grappling to stop that approach from Gittins, and then have clearly the speed, striking advantage, which should allow him to pick apart Gittins, land some big shots, slow him down. I don't know if he'll get the finish. I know Gittins is quite durable, especially at this stage in his career. But I think with the constant forward pressure and Lapilus angling out of these bad spots, I expect him to just land those big shots on Gittins and eventually win this fight on the scorecards. I don't mind him at this chalk either. All right, next up, we got Patrick Habirora coming in at -190, going up against Kevin Jousset, who comes in at +165. Now, Habirora is probably one of the biggest up-and-coming stars that the PFL has, and it seems they know it. You know, the way they've been matching this guy up, I believe he was the main event of the last PFL Europe event, where he took on former UFC fighter Danny Roberts, and he was able to land a nasty head kick knockout to get the win. Now he's getting a prime platform and prime positioning on a pretty big card to take on another former UFC fighter in Kevin Jousset. Habirora went 21-6 as an amateur. He's now 7-0 as a pro, and it's clear he has a huge following, especially with 330,000 Instagram followers. This guy has done a great job in terms of marketing himself and being an entertaining fighter, because at his best, he is a sniper from distance with his footwork, landing those straight shots down the pipe, landing those head kicks. He's very good in finding those angles and countering his opponents whenever they showcase some openings. Where opponents have taken advantage of him, even in fights that he ended up winning, or when guys were able to take him to the ground and find success with holding him down and landing big enough shots from on top. But once he gets back to his feet, he's very good in terms of implementing that striking advantage that he often holds because of that speed and accuracy. Now, he's going up against Kevin Jousset, who was cut from the UFC after losing 2 fights in a row. He was 2-0 going into that first loss that he suffered against Brian Battle, and then eventually he lost to Jonathan McAuliffe back in February in a fight where he just couldn't corral the constant movement of McAuliffe, who just chipped away at him with kicks and didn't really land anything of significance, but he's clearly doing more than Jousset. Now, Jousset comes from a judoka background, but training out of City Kickboxing, he's refined his striking game pretty well, which kind of fooled me earlier on in his UFC career, where he seemed to be more of a striker than a grappler. But he seems to be so comfortable in the striking realm that that's where he often leans on and relies on to get most of his victories. Good combinations, good kicking game, very strong in the clinch as well. And I expect him to lean on that judo background here against Habirora to try to keep Habirora from getting from his striking advantage. This could be a competitive matchup, which makes sense as to why this line is only -190 for Habirora, considering the amount of hype that he has. And I think Jousset will definitely challenge him and make this a little bit harder of a fight. But ultimately, I think it's going to be Habirora's ability to stay at his striking range, land those fast, straight shots down, and really start to just wear Jousset down with the type of damage that he's landing. And I think eventually it lines up a big knockout shot for Habirora to get Jousset out of there. So I'm going to go Habirora. I would think twice about playing him at this number, though, especially against somebody as experienced as Jousset. Yeah, I wouldn't hate on anybody looking to shoot on Jousset either. That's not a bad line, but I think Habirora is the better fighter at this point in time, and I think that's going to showcase as he continues to outstrike and eventually knock out Kevin Jousset. All right, that brings us to our first of 2 title fights on this PFL card, and we got Chris Cyborg coming in at -700, going up against Sarah Collins, who comes in at +500. Now, it's not been all that often that we've been seeing Cyborg fight in MMA, especially with her at 40 years old. See, she seems to be more so focused on the boxing game, which is where she seems to be getting more activity, more fights, the ability to stay a little bit more active. And I just don't know if PFL really has the type of roster to give her consistent opponents so she can stay active enough in the MMA world. Her last fight was actually against Larissa Pacheco in a very fun fight, but I was very surprised to see Cyborg as the underdog in that matchup. I get, maybe a lot of people thinking she was past her prime and Pacheco would have had the perfect style to beat her, but it was clear that Cyborg won 4 out of those 5 rounds. Some of those rounds with her grappling, some of those rounds with her striking, but she did a great job in terms of muzzling the younger fighter in Pacheco and just sticking to her game. We know she has a nasty Muay Thai game. We know her strength usually helps her in the grappling realm, but if she had it her way, she would be looking to knock opponents out quickly and just trying to get out of there as soon as possible. Now she's going up against Sarah Collins, who is now 6-0, and this judoka black belt was able to submit Leah McCord in her last matchup, but that fight wasn't actually until September of 2014. So it's been a long time since we've really seen her in action. I don't know if that's just because of the lack of roster that the PFL has in this division, or if she's just been dealing with injuries. But, she's shown a grapple heavy approach in certain fights, and she's also shown a striking heavy approach in certain fights. But the issue is, there's a giant gap between finding somebody like Leah McCord and then going on to fight somebody like Chris Cyborg. So it makes complete sense to me why Cyborg is all the way up at minus 700 in this spot. I think she's parlayable there. But the one spot I think that's a little intriguing is the over 1.5, which I think is coming in around that minus 140, minus 135 line now. I don't think that this is a fight that Cyborg will just run through Collins. I think we'll see some exchanging in the clinch realm. I think we'll see Collins try to push this into deeper water. But I think Cyborg, just wears Collins down, whether it's against the clinch, whether it's against the cage, whether it's with the combinations. I think she really wears her down and ends up winning this on the scorecards. I think Collins is tough. She's still, she's 35, so she's not a youngster by any means, but she doesn't have a lot of miles on her tank or on her body, and I think that's going to allow her to survive some early spots here with Cyborg. And again, Cyborg this much later in her career, not as cerebral as a finisher as she used to be, so she's just being a little bit more smart with her gas tank and just managing her gas tank well enough so she can wear opponents down and still win decisions pretty convincingly, and I expect her to do that here. So I don't mind parlaying Cyborg at this number, but I also don't mind taking a little bit of a shot on the over 1.5, but I expect Cyborg to leave Lyon, France with the PFL Featherweight Championship. All right, that now brings us to our main event, which goes down for the vacant heavyweight PFL title, and it goes down between former Bellator light heavyweight champion Vadim Nemkov, who comes in at minus 450, going up against former PFL World Tournament champion Renan Ferreira, who comes in at plus 350. Now, starting off on the Nemkov side of things, there were some rumblings that he was going to get signed to the UFC, but it seems like the UFC was lowballing him, and the PFL decided to just re him up, and thus he's back with the PFL, which is a huge, unfortunate issue because Nemkov would have been amazing to see over in the UFC. But he's, 33 years old, still very talented. Some people, including myself, was questioning why he went up to heavyweight after he was so dominant at light heavyweight, but it seems like he's transitioning to this new division pretty well. He tacked on about 20 or 30 pounds. He still moves very well. He's very strong. It allows him to get to his wrestling game pretty easily, and then from there, he does a great job in terms of establishing that top position and really wearing opponents down. The debut he had against at heavyweight against Bruno Capoloza, and then even his last fight where he ran through Tim Johnson. Very impressive. I think he's going to be probably the best heavyweight on the PFL roster. From his striking to his grappling, he's pretty much good everywhere. Now he's going up against Renan Ferreira, who we haven't seen in over a year. And the last time we saw him, he got ground and pounded by Francis Ngannou in Ngannou's only post-UFC MMA fight. If you guys remember, Ngannou set up his contract so that whoever he faces was going to get a guaranteed $1 million purse. And I think that's what Ferreira was kind of enjoying over the last year or so while sitting on the sidelines. We know what Ferreira brings to the table. He's massive as a heavyweight, has crazy knockout power, but his ground game is very bad, which is why opponents often have a lot of success taking him to the ground and either grinding him out or ground and pounding him the way that Francis Ngannou did. His PFL championship win for the tournament back in 2023 came against Denis Goltsov, who ended up winning 2024. But that was a fight where the entire first round was Ferreira on his back. But then luckily in the opening seconds of round 2, he was able to land a big enough shot to finish Denis Goltsov. But if Goltsov got in on that takedown, we knew exactly how that fight was going to pan out. Now, in this fight against Nemkov, I think for good reason Nemkov is a big favorite. I expect his speed to allow him to stay away from the big power of Ferreira, and then once he's able to get in on the hips, I expect him to get Ferreira to the ground pretty easily, and I'd be surprised if he's not able to finish him. We got 5 rounds here, so I'd be surprised if this reaches round 3. I fully expect Nemkov to continuously get Ferreira to the ground and then transition to a dominant enough position to either sink in a submission, sink in a choke, or even mount up a ground and pound victory. But I think Nemkov runs through Ferreira without too much issue. And new PFL heavyweight champion, Vadim Nemkov. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for PFL Europe and the last MMA Lockcast episode for the year. Again, make sure you guys check out all the UFC Vegas content that I drop for you guys. Over the next 2 weeks, I'll be dropping main event breakdowns for those regional cards, and then I'll also be doing a recap show. I'll probably do that, beginning of January, since we have such a long lull before the first UFC event. But I'll be doing a recap episode, as well as letting you guys know what to expect for 2026, as I'm going to chain up or restructure the channel a little bit. I feel like I've been spending a lot of time on things that don't really get too much traction. So I want to try to beef up the quality of the videos when I drop them, so that they get, near the amount of views that my full card breakdowns get as well. So I think I have the perfect plan to try to capitalize on that. But appreciate the love and support as always. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys again, I guess tomorrow, for the Locky 2-step, Locky Trinity free parlay video, as well as the prop drop, both for UFC Vegas 112. I'll see you guys then. Peace.
Last thing.